starts crying again. Like, the baby's just crying in the worst possible times you could ever have a baby cry as an actor. Hey, I'm Justin Baldoni, director of It Ends With Us, and I am
Blake goes on to explain that these friends have witnessed moments in her career where she felt overlooked or undervalued. She references past experiences where she says she wrote script revisions because a director wouldn't send a digital file, or where she was hired and paid to write but allegedly asked not to seek official credit. For her, she frames this not as a matter of ego but as a broader issue of professional dynamics and recognition. In her telling, Taylor, Ryan, and Sean were reacting protectively because they had seen those patterns before and didn't want her contributions minimized again. From a broader perspective, this portion of the exchange introduces a new layer to the dynamic. What began as two collaborators expressing mutual excitement now includes influential third parties whose opinions and support are explicitly mentioned, whether viewed as reassurance, advocacy, or added pressure. The reference to such high-profile creative allies undeniably changes the tone of the conversation. It suggests that the creative discussion is no longer just between actor and director but exists within a wider circle of trusted advisors whose approval and involvement matter deeply too. Blake continues by explaining that her close circle has also seen the other side of her professional experiences, times when she says she was promised true collaboration at signing, only to later feel like she was expected to simply agree and perform rather than actively shape the material. She frames this as a recurring dynamic in her career, suggesting that she has often been valued publicly as a collaborator but privately treated as someone who should just go along with the established vision. She then emphasizes that Ryan Reynolds and Taylor Swift have proven themselves to be powerful creative forces beyond their primary professions, just as Sean Levy has built his reputation as a major director and storyteller. In her view, their success makes them reliable, creative barometers, people whose instincts she trusts deeply. She says they not only support her creatively, but also ensure she is properly seen and acknowledged for her contributions, particularly in situations where she might otherwise fade into the background or be minimized. Blake also reflects on her own tendencies, admitting that she may not always advocate for herself as forcefully as others think, and that there can be unspoken pressures in collaborative environments, whether from ego, hierarchy, or the desire to keep a production running smoothly. She suggests that sometimes people hesitate to fully credit contributions out of fear of disrupting dynamics or threatening authority. In that context, she positions her trusted circle as protectors, people who speak up when she doesn't and who command enough respect that others listen. Then she pivots to a metaphor drawn from Game of Thrones, referencing Daenerys Targaryen, often called Khaleesi, character who evolves from a sympathetic underdog into a far more controversial and formidable figure. Blake compares herself to that character, joking that she, too, has a few dragons, implying powerful allies who defend and protect those she stands behind. She frames these dragons as beneficial forces, intense, perhaps intimidating, but ultimately protective and loyal. She assures Justin that he would benefit from them as well. Presenting the metaphor as both playful and pointed, depending on interpretation, it can read as humor layered with seriousness, a declaration that she is not alone, and that her support system carries influence. Justin's response, by contrast, appears measured and restrained. He thanks her for writing and says he has much to respond to but needs time, explaining that he had been busy giving a talk to youth in Baja and hadn't had a moment to properly reply. He mentions sending a voicemail from an Uber and hopes it won't wake her, acknowledging the late hour. The tone suggests someone trying to thoughtfully process a dense and emotionally charged message rather than reacting impulsively. What follows, described as a late-night voice memo, would later be scrutinized by observers. But within the context of film production schedules, such late communication is not unusual. Taken together, this exchange marks a noticeable escalation in tone. What began as mutual praise and creative alignment evolves into a conversation layered with personal history, powerful allies, metaphors of strength and protection, and subtle assertions of influence. The dynamic shifts from simple collaboration to something more complex where trust, authority, validation, and power all appear intertwined. From this point forward, the tone of the exchanges appears outwardly cordial, with Justin continuing to reassure Blake that everything is on track and that the collaboration will be fine. The overall impression from the memos is that he is attempting to steady the situation, emphasizing teamwork, creative alignment, and a shared goal of making the best possible film. He repeatedly frames the process as collaborative, expressing appreciation for her ideas, her passion, and her willingness to engage deeply with the material. His feedback, at least on its face, reads as broadly positive rather than critical. Complimenting someone's passion and collaborative spirit in a filmmaking environment is often meant as encouragement, especially given that not every actor chooses to involve themselves in script revisions or structural discussions. However, the interpretation of those same words clearly differs depending on perspective. Blake's response suggests that she may have been looking for more, specific validation of her contributions, rather than general praise, while Justin seemed comfortable keeping feedback high and trusting that refinements would happen organically during rehearsals or on set, as is common in many productions. Blake's follow-up messages indicate that she wanted clearer acknowledgement of the substance of her rewrites. That disconnect in communication style appears to be one of the early friction points in their dynamic. The broader exchange also reveals differences in approach. Justin, described as a relatively newer director at the time, seems focused on managing tone, pacing, and overall cohesion of the script while maintaining morale. Blake, by contrast, comes across as highly assertive about her creative influence and determined to ensure her contributions are not minimized. She references past professional experiences where she felt overlooked, and she underscores the backing of influential creative allies in her life. Whether that was intended as reassurance, advocacy, or subtle pressure is open to interpretation, but it undeniably shifts the power dynamic from a simple two-person collaboration to something more layered. What stands out most is that, at this early stage, there is no explicit rejection or hostility in Justin's messages. He does not shut her down or dismiss her work. Instead, he signals enthusiasm while trying to balance practical considerations like page count and story flow. Meanwhile, Blake pushes for recognition and clarity. That difference between broad encouragement and specific validation may seem small in isolation, but in high-stakes creative environments, those nuances can grow into larger misunderstandings. Ultimately, the memos and texts, when viewed together, illustrate how two professionals who initially expressed mutual admiration and shared ambition could still experience tension beneath the surface. The situation reflects a common reality in filmmaking. Strong personalities, high expectations, and differing communication styles can coexist even when both parties believe they are working toward the same goal. Another voice memo has now been unredacted in the ongoing legal dispute involving Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, and when it is considered alongside the previously released text messages, it adds even more context to what their professional relationship looked like before it reportedly deteriorated. The memo, dated April 8, 2023, prior to the start of production, captures Blake offering to send over her past-the-roof material or review it together in person the following week. Asking which option he preferred, in the message, she explains that if he had known her longer in person, he would better understand her playful, flirtatious style of humor, describing it as bold and spicy but never intended to hurt. She characterizes this teasing tone as part of her personality and even refers to it as her love language, suggesting that her directness was meant to be fun and expressive rather than serious or inappropriate. She goes on to say she could act the material out for him in person to make sure the tone landed correctly, and she signs off warmly, emphasizing a casual and friendly dynamic. However, Justin's reported response strikes a very different emotional note. Instead of engaging in playful he apologized for a delayed reply and explained that he had been crying after his children and family had just left for 5 weeks. He described the situation as heartbreaking and overwhelming, clearly placing his emotional focus on his family rather than on lighthearted banter. The contrast between Blake's energetic, teasing tone and Justin's vulnerable, family-centered response highlights a significant difference in mindset at that moment. While Blake appeared to be leaning into a confident, joking rapport ahead of filming, Justin seemed preoccupied with personal matters and the emotional weight of being away from his loved ones during production. He did ultimately respond that filming was important, signaling his professional commitment, but the exchange overall paints a picture of two very different emotional headspaces leading into the project, something that may offer additional perspective. When viewed within the broader timeline of their reported conflict, in the continued exchange between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, the tone remains notably aligned and collaborative before any public fallout occurred. Justin emphasizes that it's important for the film that they fully commit to discovering the characters together, expressing excitement about shaping the story in a meaningful way. He agrees that Lily needs to come across as strong, witty, playful, and bold, explaining that those qualities are exactly why he wanted Blake for the role in the first place. He even notes that aging the character up made sense creatively, suggesting that if a woman like her could believably fall into that relationship dynamic, it would make the emotional impact of the third act even more devastating for audiences. Blake responds enthusiastically, thanking him and agreeing wholeheartedly about the importance of Act 3, calling it the mission. At that stage, they appear completely in sync, aligned on character development, tone, and the emotional weight of the story they're trying to tell. Shortly after that exchange, a new voice memo from Justin adds further insight into his mindset at the time. In the message, he apologizes for the delay in responding, explaining that he had intentionally taken hours to try to feel like a normal person amid the emotional upheaval of his family leaving for several weeks. He shares that one of his best friends happened to arrive in town just as he was saying goodbye to his family, and spending time together, including attending a comedy show, helped distract him from how deeply sad he had been the day before. He also mentioned spending time with Hazen Minhaj, who was set to play Marshall, describing how the group hung out and enjoyed a brief sense of normalcy away from constant discussions about the movie. The memo paints a picture of someone juggling personal emotions while still trying to stay professionally engaged. Justin then transitions back to Blake's materials, saying he read them, laughed, and genuinely appreciated her passion, her ideas, and her collaborative spirit. He specifically acknowledges how much she cares about the creative process, calling that dedication so cool, and contrasts it with experiences he has had with other actors who may not show the same level of investment. He expresses that he can feel in his bones how excited he is to work with her creatively, underscoring that, at that moment in time, there was clear mutual respect and anticipation about the partnership. The overall tone of the memo suggests enthusiasm, admiration, and professional alignment, an important detail when viewed within the broader timeline of how they're working. Relationship later reportedly unraveled. In the continuation of the voice memo, Justin Baldoni sounds genuinely enthusiastic about the collaboration, telling Blake Lively that it feels like they are on the verge of making something special together. He compliments her directly, calling her smart, funny, and clearly a strong writer, and says he can see exactly what she's aiming to accomplish with the scene revisions. He explains that he laughed while reading her pages and could vividly picture how she would perform the material, particularly appreciating the banter and wit she infused into the dialogue. At the same time, he raises a practical concern about page count, noting that the scene was already running 10 or 11 pages, and that they should be mindful about adding too much more. Rather than rejecting her ideas, he frames the process as collaborative, suggesting they'll likely blend what was originally on the page with her contributions and discover the strongest version together during rehearsals and filming. He emphasizes that he wants Lily to feel layered and powerful, not simply portrayed as a young, naive woman, because that complexity would make the eventual emotional turn in the story hit even harder. His tone throughout suggests openness, encouragement, and a desire to workshop the material rather than shut it down. He also briefly references a Lupin Christie, identified as his writer, reinforcing that the screenplay is part of a broader creative team effort. Importantly, he never flatly dismisses Blake's version. Instead, he repeatedly circles back to the idea of collaboration, improvisation, and refining the material. Organically, something common in many film productions, the underlying message appears to be that the script is evolving, and that both of their creative instincts will shape the final product. Blake's subsequent text response reflects that same spirit of unity. She thanks him and says his words mean a lot, explaining that she feels deeply inspired by the film they're about to make, not just because of the book's existing popularity, but because of the opportunity to expand beyond it and surprise audiences. She recalls a previous moment where he had jokingly called himself not funny and reassures him that he absolutely is, especially in the rooftop scene they had been discussing. Her message conveys trust and partnership, telling him she believes he's got her back on set and expressing hope that he feels the same about her. She describes them as two highly driven people with high standards, who care deeply about both the final result and the experience of making the film. Perhaps most notably, she insists she has no motive except for him to win, whether as a director, actor, writer, or studio partner, because if he wins, she wins, and the movie wins. She reiterates that they are aligned and promises to bring everything she has to the project. Taken together, these exchanges paint a picture of two creatives expressing mutual respect, shared ambition, and a strong sense of partnership at that point in time, with both framing the project as a joint mission built on trust and collaboration. Blake then shifts the tone of the conversation by bringing other major names into the discussion. She explains that when it comes to Taylor Swift, Ryan Reynolds, and Sean Levy, she considers herself incredibly lucky to have them in her corner, jokingly referring to them as her dance moms or stage moms because of how enthusiastically supportive they are. She describes them as her most trusted creative partners, the first people she goes to with anything she works on, and says that she is also the first person they turn to with their own projects. According to her, that kind of reciprocal creative exchange and loyalty has been one of the most fulfilling gifts of her life. She adds that when they read and approved the pages she had written, it gave her confidence to send them along. She notes that they specifically asked what Justin thought afterward and that they kept checking in repeatedly about his reaction. She recounts telling them that he laughed, said it would probably be a blend of versions, and that he appreciated her passion. However, she admits that framing didn't feel great to her or to Vemby because her passion was praised instead of any particular line, joke, or structural contribution. She even says it would have been fine if he had simply stated he didn't like the pages, implying that clarity would have felt more validating than a general compliment about enthusiasm. The
discussion wrapped up with audience questions and commentary about media perception. One person suggested that even if Judge Lyman dismissed the case, Blake Lively might still win in the court of public opinion due to publicity. Justin countered that the public is increasingly seeing through media headlines and narratives, citing how initial reports about Taylor Swift's involvement were later contradicted by her texts. On the topic of sexual harassment versus sexual assault, Justin clarified that harassment would involve behavior akin to Harvey Weinstein's notorious casting couch practices, leveraging the power to make or break careers. He noted that such abuses of power have existed in Hollywood for over a century and likely in human history in general. Whenever someone has the ability to control life-changing opportunities over another person, the conversation then shifted to more personal, light-hearted topics. Justin shared that it was late 12:15 a.m. and he needed sleep. He talked briefly about family plans, including picking up his dog from his parents while his mom runs a half marathon. There was playful banter about running, comparing past experience with swimming, running marathons in 5 kiloseconds, highlighting a friendly challenge while acknowledging realistic limits. Finally, Justin wrapped up by signing off and passing viewers to a friend's stream about Laura Owen's bankruptcy, ending the session with his usual humor and casual encouragement to stay inside